Restoring Pelican Inn. A later in life love at Pelican Inn romance. Written by Susanne Ash. Please like and subscribe. Chapter 1. The causeway to Palmar Island stretched before Elise like a ribbon of memories, each turn bringing back fragments she'd thought long forgotten. Travis teaching her to cast a fishing line off the pier, his patience endless as she tangled line after line. The taste of salt on her lips after swimming. Their mother's voice calling them in for dinner, carried on the evening breeze. She hadn't meant to think about Travis. Not yet. But everything about this place whispered his name. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as her rental car crested the bridge. The late June heat shimmered off the pavement, and the familiar scent of salt and jasmine drifted through her open window. Some things hadn't changed in 35 years. The way the light played on the water. The silhouette of boats against the morning sky. The heavy air that made her curls wild and her skin sticky. Other things felt jarringly different. Main Street seemed shorter, the shops more weathered. Had the island always been this small? The tourist crowd seemed thinner than she remembered, though maybe that would change as summer progressed. Beach umbrellas dotted the shore in the distance, and she could hear the faint chatter from the coffee shop's outdoor seating. But it all felt different from her childhood memories. More quaint than quixotic. More small town than summer paradise. She'd spent every summer here until she was 17, but now it felt like something out of a half-remembered dream. The sooner she dealt with all this, the sooner she could get back to Ohio and her real life. Back to her new office waiting to be unpacked, her Thursday night book club, the vice principal position she'd worked so hard to earn. The life she'd spent 30 years building, while Travis had walked away from his accounting firm 2 years ago, drawn back to the island of their childhood summers. She should have visited when he first bought the place. Should have returned his calls more often, not just on holidays and birthdays. Should have done a lot of things differently. But now it was too late, and all she had left was this old inn and a letter from her brother's lawyer. The GPS chirped, directing her down a narrow road lined with oak trees. Their branches formed a canopy overhead, Spanish moss swaying in the breeze like tired ghosts. Travis had sent her photos of this drive, texting about the family of cardinals nesting in one of the trees, his excitement clear even through the screen. That had been 8 months ago? He'd called, too, talking faster than she'd heard since they were kids, going on about his plans for the inn. She'd listened while grading essays, making the right noises at what she'd thought were the right moments, promising she'd visit soon. But soon had never come. And there, at the end of the drive, stood the Pelican Inn. Elise's breath caught. The photos from the lawyer hadn't done justice to the reality. The white paint was peeling, gray wood showing through like old scars. Weeds choked the shell-lined path, and several shutters hung askew, giving the whole place a lopsided, neglected air. The wraparound porch sagged slightly, as if the weight of needed repairs was physically pressing it down. Oh, Travis. She killed the engine, letting her forehead rest against the steering wheel for just a moment. What were you thinking? The words came out soft, caught somewhere between frustration and grief. The crunch of boots on gravel jerked her head up. A tall man in a faded work shirt was striding toward her car, his expression set in hard lines. There was sawdust in his salt and pepper hair, and his rolled-up sleeves revealed strong forearms tanned by outdoor work. Elise grabbed her purse and stepped out into the wall of heat. "I'm looking for Jacob Oswald?" "You found him." His voice was deep, with an edge that suggested he already knew exactly who she was. "Elise Bray?" She nodded, pushing damp hair off her forehead. Up close, the inn looked even worse. A broken window on the second floor caught her eye, and was that mold creeping up the corner of the porch? Travis had always been the dreamer between them, but surely he must have seen how much work this place needed. "I heard from the lawyer." Jacob crossed his arms. "I figured you'd send a real estate agent." The accusation in his tone made her spine stiffen. "I prefer to handle things personally." "That'll be a first." The words hit like a slap. She opened her mouth to respond, but Jacob was already moving toward the porch steps, rattling off problems like items on a grocery list. Foundation's solid, but the southeast corner needs reinforcement. Whole electrical system needs updating. Plumbing's original in some places. He glanced back at her. Travis had plans drawn up for all of it, but we barely scratched the surface before, he broke off, jaw tightening. Well, contractor's estimate is around 80,000. Probably more once we open up the walls. Elise's head spun. 80,000? She hadn't expected. What had Travis gotten himself into? The property has good bones, Jacob continued, but his tone suggested he doubted she cared. Your brother was going to turn it into something special. Could still be that way with the right investment. Right owner. The emphasis on those last words was subtle but clear. Elise forced herself to take a steadying breath, the way she did when her seniors were being particularly difficult. Mr. Oswald. Look, I get it. He turned to face her fully, and she noticed his eyes were an intense gray blue, like the ocean before a storm. You've got your life in Ohio. Travis said you were finally getting that administrator position you'd been working toward. But this place? He gestured at the inn. This meant something to him. He had a vision for it. Real plans. And I'm sure those plans didn't include dying at 58 and leaving it to his estranged sister. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, bitter with grief and guilt. With all the things left unsaid between them. Something flickered in Jacob's expression, but before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from inside the inn. He muttered a curse and headed for the door. Stay here, he called over his shoulder. Some of the floorboards aren't stable. Elise watched him disappear into the dim interior, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and something else she couldn't quite name. She turned back to survey the overgrown garden, the peeling paint, the endless list of repairs. In the far corner, half hidden by weeds, she caught a glimpse of the old stone bench where she and Travis used to sit, planning adventures they never took. What exactly had she inherited here? A money pit? A burden? Or something else? Something that had made her practical, steady brother throw himself into such an ambitious restoration? Another crash sounded from inside, followed by muffled swearing. Elise squared her shoulders and headed for the porch steps. Unstable floorboards or not, she wasn't about to stand around in the heat while a stranger poked around her property. Elise followed the sound of Jacob's boots across creaking floorboards, her low heels clicking against wood that had seen better days. The foyer opened into what must have been a grand gathering room, though now it was more dust than grandeur. Sheets draped the furniture like shrouds, and cobwebs stretched between the crystal arms of a chandelier. A loud clatter followed by creative cursing led her to what had once been a sitting room. She found Jacob amidst a shower of plaster and laugh, a section of the ceiling having chosen this moment to give way despite the temporary supports he'd installed. I told you to wait outside. He didn't look up from where he was assessing the damage, plastered dust settling on his shoulders. And I didn't. Elise moved closer, sidestepping fallen debris. Considering I own the place now, I think I have the right to see it. Own it? His laugh held no humor. Lady, you've been here all of 20 minutes. Travis lived and breathed this place. Spent every spare moment planning, dreaming, working. And I'm sure you knew him so well. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. Tell me, Mr. Oswald, in the 2 years my brother owned this inn, did he ever mention why we stopped coming here? Why our family split apart? Or did you just assume I was the villain in his story? Jacob straightened, his expression shifting. He said it was complicated. Complicated. She crossed her arms, ignoring the way her silk blouse stuck to her skin in the heavy air. Well, that's one word for it. Now, are you going to show me what I'm dealing with, or should I wander around on my own and risk falling through those unstable floorboards you mentioned? For a long moment, he just looked at her, as if seeing her properly for the first time. Then he nodded, gesturing toward the hall. Kitchen's through here. Watch your step. There's a loose board by the doorframe. The next hour passed in a blur of repairs and requirements. The kitchen's original cabinets were salvageable but needed refinishing. The dining room's pocket doors were stuck. Every room held some new challenge, some fresh reminder of everything Travis had taken on. The tour finally over, Elise headed back to her car for her bags. She'd brought a practical rolling suitcase and leather weekend bag that looked absurdly out of place among the inn's faded elegance. She hesitated at the bottom of the main staircase, but Jacob's voice stopped her. "Your brother's rooms are through here." He gestured down a hallway off the main foyer. He kept a small suite on the ground floor. Said the sunrise was better from this side of the house. Elise followed him to a set of rooms that felt jarringly different from the rest of the inn. Here, the air wasn't stale, and while the furniture was old, it was clean and well kept. A small sitting room opened into a bedroom, and off that. He set this up as a guest room. Jacob's voice had softened slightly. Just in case. Just in case she finally visited. The thought caught in her throat as she took in the neatly made bed, the fresh curtains, the empty dresser with its drawers lined in lavender paper that still held a trace of fragrance. "I'll let you get settled." Jacob's boots echoed down the hall, leaving her alone with yet another reminder of her brother's hope that she'd come home. Alone in the quiet room, Elise began to unpack, trying to ignore how each detail, the fresh curtains, the lavender-scented drawer liners, felt like a conversation they'd never get to have. As she moved to set her laptop on the desk, something caught her eye. An envelope, cream-colored and expensive, propped against an old brass lamp. Her name in Travis's familiar scrawl. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked it up. The sun had set by the time she finally sat down to read it, the letter heavy in her hands. She traced the letters with one finger, remembering how he used to help her with her handwriting when they were kids, his patience endless even then. "Dear Elise, if you're reading this, I guess I waited too long to make things right. Story of my life, huh? Always thinking there'd be more time. I know the inn is a lot to dump in your lap. But you're the only one I trust to see its potential. Remember how we used to sit on that old stone bench, planning adventures? This place could be one hell of an adventure, sis. I've left all the plans with Jacob. He knows what I wanted to do here. What it could become. He's a good man. A friend. I know you built a good life in Ohio. But maybe there's room for something more? Something unexpected? The choice is yours. It always has been. Love. Travis." Her vision blurred. She set the letter down carefully, then reached for her phone, scrolling to a familiar name. "Tell me I'm not crazy," she said when Linda answered. Her friend's warm laugh filled the line. "Hello to you too. I take it you made it to the island?" "It's a mess, Lynn. The whole place needs." Elise ran a hand through her hair. "Everything. New wiring, new plumbing, probably a new roof. Travis's contractor was here, listing off numbers that made my savings account cry. Ah. And how many times have you checked your email to make sure Riverside High still wants you for fall semester?" "I haven't." She paused. "Today." Linda's knowing tone carried clearly across the miles. "Honey, that job is everything you've worked for. Vice principal position, full pension in 7 years. You've wanted this since they first hinted Sullivan was retiring." "I know." Elise stood, pacing to the window. Below, moonlight silvered the overgrown garden. "I'm not thinking of staying. I just need to get the place fixed up enough to sell. Maybe break even on Travis's investment, if I'm lucky." "Good. Because Carol would never forgive you if you missed book club permanently." "And what about your staff?" "They're already excited to move you into the vice principal's office." "It's just for the summer," Elise said firmly, more to herself than Linda. "Long enough to handle things here. Then I'll be back, ready to tackle my new office and finally implement all those curriculum changes we talked about." "That's my girl." Linda yawned. "Call me tomorrow? I want to hear all about this contractor who's got you so riled up." "I am not," but Linda had already hung up, leaving Elise alone with her protests. She got ready for bed mechanically, her mind still churning. Through the window, she could hear waves in the distance, their rhythm familiar even after all these years. The bed was comfortable, of course it was, Travis would have made sure of that, but sleep felt far away. Just the summer, she whispered to the darkness. But somewhere between one breath and the next, she could have sworn she heard Travis laugh. Chapter 2. She's going to sell it. Jacob set down his fork, the words as bitter as the coffee Miss Doris was brewing to go with her peach cobbler. You should have seen her face when I mentioned the cost of repairs. Like she was already calculating how fast she could list it. From her seat at the head of the well-worn oak table, Miss Doris raised one silver eyebrow. The kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the lingering scent of pot roast and fresh herbs from her garden. Through the windows, the light of the moon sparkled against the dark water of the Atlantic Ocean. And you're sure about that, are you? She rose to check the percolator. From one afternoon's interaction? You didn't see her, Miss D. Everything about her screams mainland professional, from her sensible shoes to her teacher-perfect posture. That particular way of looking at everything like she's already decided it's not worth her time. He caught the slight twitch of her lips. What? Nothing, dear. More cobbler? You didn't drag me over here for dinner just to feed me dessert. Of course I did. You've been living on protein bars and coffee again, haven't you? She set a steaming mug in front of him. But you're right. I also thought you might need to talk about Travis's sister showing up. The name hung in the air between them. Jacob closed his eyes briefly, remembering late nights at the inn, Travis spreading out drawings and plans on sawhorses, his enthusiasm infectious as he described period-appropriate fixtures and historically accurate paint colors. She doesn't even know about the garden yet. Jacob wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. Travis was so excited about restoring it. Found these old photographs from the 1920s, when it was all formal paths and rose arbors. He tracked down heritage plants that would have been used back then. The supplies are still sitting in the garden shed, waiting. And did you tell her about any of this? Jacob shifted in his chair. Didn't see the point. She'd already made up her mind before she walked through the door. Jacob Oswald. Miss Doris's tone could have stripped paint. That woman just lost her brother. The same brother who, from what you've told me, she hadn't properly spoken to in years. And now she's inherited a massive project she never asked for, in a place she hasn't visited since she was practically a child. Maybe she needs someone to help her see what Travis saw. Not someone listing off repair costs like items on a bill of sale. She's got some fancy vice principal job waiting in Ohio, he muttered, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. Why would she even consider staying? Why did Travis? Jacob had no answer for that. He stared into his coffee instead, remembering the day Travis had first walked into his office. Just another retiree looking to renovate an old house, he'd thought. But Travis had been different. He'd understood that these old buildings weren't just structures. They were stories, pieces of history that deserved to be preserved. And they'd become close as they worked side by side. An unexpected friendship had formed as they stripped wallpaper and tore out old carpet. The water heater's about to go, he said finally. Noticed it this afternoon. Making that weird clicking sound they get right before they die. And I might have called Mike already. He's coming first thing tomorrow to replace it. At Miss Doris's look, he added, what? She'll need hot water either way. Might as well fix it before it becomes an emergency. Miss Doris began gathering dishes, the familiar routine of her movements comforting in their certainty. You know what I think? I'm sure you're about to tell me. I think you're not really angry at Elise for potentially selling the inn. I think you're angry because losing that place means losing the last piece of Travis you had left. She paused at the sink. Just remember, she lost him too. The kitchen fell quiet except for the soft clink of dishes and the distant sound of waves. His phone buzzed. Mike confirmed he'd be there at 7 with the new water heater. He typed back a quick reply, then pulled up his contact list. He still had Travis's number saved. They'd texted about the inn just days before everything changed. Travis sending photos of vintage doorknobs he'd found at some salvage yard in Charleston. Jacob suggesting a guy who could replicate the missing pieces of crown molding in the parlor. "You should head home," Miss Doris said softly. "You've got an early morning ahead." He knew she was right. And if he knew anything about these old properties, that water heater wouldn't be the only thing trying to fall apart this week. And he and Travis had put too much work into the old Pelican Inn to watch it all go away. He hoped Elise would give the place a chance before she wrote it off completely. Give them time to show her what her brother had seen in the old inn. What it could become, with the right care and attention. What it deserved to be. The night air was heavy with salt and jasmine as he walked to his truck. Behind him, warm light spilled from Miss Doris's windows, and somewhere in the distance, waves broke against the shore with the steady rhythm that had drawn people to this island for generations. Including Travis. And maybe even Elise. If he could make her see what they'd all seen in this place. Mike was already unloading the water heater when Elise emerged onto the front porch, her hair still damp from her shower. The morning sun caught the silver threads in her dark curls, but Jacob pushed that observation aside. The thunderous expression on her face suggested this wasn't the moment to notice such details. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Her voice was precise, controlled. The kind of tone that probably made her students sit up straighter in their chairs. "Fixing your water heater." Jacob gestured to where Mike was wrestling the equipment onto a dolly. "The old one's about to give out. Figured you'd prefer a planned replacement to waking up to a cold shower. And you didn't think to ask me first?" "I already had Mike scheduled to come out this morning. Seemed easier to just handle it." The words came out more defensive than he'd intended. He hadn't expected her to be up this early, had thought he could just get it done and tell her after. She crossed her arms, and Jacob noticed her fingers were practically white where they gripped her elbows. "That's not the point. You can't just," she broke off, watching Mike maneuver the dolly toward the kitchen entrance. "How much is this going to cost?" "Don't worry about it." "Don't worry about it?" Her laugh held no humor. "Oh, that's rich. You spent all yesterday telling me how expensive everything is going to be, and now suddenly I shouldn't worry about it?" She turned abruptly and headed down the shell path toward the beach, her movements stiff with contained energy. Jacob watched her go, remembering Miss Doris's words from the night before. The woman just lost her brother. He should probably let her walk it off. With a sigh, he headed inside, where Mike was already disconnecting the old unit. "I'll get the coffee started," he called to Mike. "Usual rate plus rush fee?" "You know it." Mike's voice echoed from behind the ancient water heater. "Though from the look on her face, you might want to make that coffee Irish." Jacob snorted and headed for the kitchen. He knew where Travis had kept, the coffee and filters. Knew which cabinet held mugs, which drawer held spoons. The routine of measuring grounds and filling the reservoir gave his hands something to do while his mind churned. He was still there 20 minutes later when Elise returned, the sound of her feet on the porch boards declaring her mood hadn't improved. She stopped in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene, him at the counter, 2 mugs of coffee steaming beside him. "So now you're making yourself at home?" Her voice was quieter now, but with an edge that suggested the walk hadn't done much to calm her down. "Coffee's not just for me." He turned, leaning back against the counter. "Figured you could use some, considering the morning you've had." "The morning I've had?" She stepped fully into the kitchen, and he noticed sand clinging to her shoes, the way the ocean breeze had loosened strands of hair around her face. "You mean the morning where I woke up to strange men in my house, making decisions about my property without consulting me? Would you rather wake up to a flood when that thing finally gives out?" He picked up one of the mugs, letting its warmth ground him. "Because that's what's coming. Probably within the week, based on the sounds it was making." "That's not," she pressed her lips together, and he could practically see her counting to 10 in her head. "This isn't about the water heater. This is about you deciding you know what's best for my property." Travis's property. The words hung between them. Elise's fingers curled into fists at her sides, pain flickering in her eyes. Travis left it to me, she said finally. Which means decisions about repairs, improvements, or anything else are mine to make. Not yours. Jacob set his mug down carefully. You planning to stick around long enough to make those decisions? Because from where I'm standing, you've already got one foot out the door. She took a step closer, close enough that he could smell the salt air clinging to her clothes, see the faint freckles across her nose that the morning sun had already started to darken. You don't know anything about me. Her voice was low, intense. Or my plans. I know you've got a life waiting in Ohio. I know you see this place as a burden instead of an opportunity. He matched her tone, leaning slightly forward. And I know your brother believed in what this place could be. Enough to spend his retirement making it happen. Something shifted in her expression. There was a crack in that professional facade she wore like armor. For a moment, he thought she might actually listen. Then Mike's voice echoed from the utility room. Hey, Jake? You're gonna want to see this. Jacob straightened, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. That's my cue. He gestured to the untouched coffee mug. Might want to drink that before it gets cold. He left her there in the kitchen, but he could feel her eyes on his back as he walked away. The weight of her gaze followed him down the hall, along with the lingering scent of ocean air and the memory of those freckles he definitely hadn't meant to notice. Chapter 3. The knock came just as Elise finished her second cup of coffee. She'd spent the morning avoiding Jacob and his insufferably good water heater installation, alternating between unpacking and making lists of everything that needed attention. The lists were getting longer by the hour. Good morning, dear. The woman on the porch had to be in her 70s, but her silver curls were perfectly styled, and her linen dress looked freshly pressed despite the humid air. She held a covered basket in one arm and what appeared to be a casserole dish in the other. I'm Miss Doris, a friend of your late brother. I thought you might appreciate a proper breakfast. Something about the warmth in the older woman's eyes and her no-nonsense manner reminded Elise of her favorite teaching mentor. Please, come in. Though I should warn you, the kitchen's a bit chaotic. The plumber just finished up. Ah, yes. Jacob mentioned the water heater. Miss Doris sailed past her into the house, navigating the renovation debris with practiced ease. That man would fix the whole island if we let him. I suppose that's why Travis trusted him so much with this place. Elise followed her to the kitchen, where Miss Doris was already unpacking her basket. The scent of fresh blueberry muffins filled the air, making Elise's grocery store granola bar seem particularly inadequate. Travis trusted everyone, Elise said, reaching for plates. It was his default setting. Oh no, dear. Your brother was a good judge of character. Miss Doris arranged muffins on a plate with the efficiency of someone who'd brought food to hundreds of island gatherings. He and Jacob were thick as these past couple years. Always planning, always dreaming up the next project. I don't think I've seen Jacob this invested in a renovation since his daughter moved away. Elise nearly dropped the coffee mug she was filling. Jacob has a daughter? Lives out in California with her mother. He doesn't talk about it much. Miss Doris gestured for Elise to sit, then placed a still warm muffin in front of her. But that's not why I'm here. I wanted to see how you're settling in. The muffin was perfect, crisp top, tender center, just the right amount of berries. I'm not planning on settling in. I need to get the place fixed up enough to sell. Of course. Miss Doris's tone suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. Well, while you're not settling in, you should know that Mary's Diner does an excellent lunch special, and the hardware store gives discounts to anyone renovating a historic property. Oh, and the library has all the original newspapers on microfiche, in case you're interested in the inn's history. Travis spent hours there, researching the original gardens. Each casual comment felt like another thread connecting Travis to this place. How many hours had he spent in that library? How many lunches at Mary's? How many conversations with Miss Doris about his plans for the inn? I should probably explore the town a bit, Elise said, mostly to stop the flood of questions in her mind. Get my bearings. Wonderful idea. The book nook just got in their summer stock. Travis used to spend hours there. And if you need to update your summer wardrobe, the boutique on Main has the prettiest linen dresses. This humidity takes some getting used to. Miss Doris's casual mentions of Travis's habits tugged at something in Elise's mind. She'd looked up the island online before coming, seen the property listings, the tourist websites promoting its small-town coastal charm. The real estate prices had surprised her, especially for such a small community. An hour later, she found herself walking down Main Street, trying to see it through Travis's eyes. The storefronts were well-maintained, their awnings bright against weathered brick. Tourists browsed gift shops while locals gathered at cafe tables, and the whole scene felt like something from a travel magazine about small-town coastal charm. The bell above Coastal Realty's door chimed as she entered. Cool air conditioning hit her face, along with the artificial scent of vanilla air freshener. Welcome to Coastal Realty. A man in his 50s rose from behind a glass desk, his smile professional and practiced. Robert Campbell. What brings you to Palmar Island? Just looking around. Elise accepted his firm handshake. I actually inherited a property here. His smile widened with recognition. The Pelican Inn? You must be Travis Bray's sister. I was so sorry to hear about his passing. News travels fast here, she said, not entirely sure how she felt about being so easily identified. Small town. He gestured for her to sit. I won't waste your time. I have clients, very motivated buyers, who've had their eye on that property for years. They're prepared to make an extremely generous offer, as is, no repairs needed. Elise's heart beat faster. How generous? He wrote a number on a notepad and slid it across the desk. Her breath caught. That was more than generous. It was life-changing. The kind of money that could fund her retirement and then some. No more pension calculations, no more careful budgeting. The developers have plans to build luxury vacation homes, Robert continued. The location is perfect, waterfront views, historic district. They'd preserve the facade of the inn, of course. Town regulations. Preserve the facade. Like a hollow shell of what Travis had dreamed. She could almost hear his voice, excited as he texted her about finding the original blueprints, about matching the heritage paint colors. I'll think about it. The air felt thick as she left the office, and not just from the humidity. She found herself walking toward the library, its brick facade solid and welcoming against the bright sky. Through the windows, she could see the microfiche readers Miss Doris had mentioned. How many hours had Travis spent here, researching the inn's history? Learning about the families who'd lived there, the events that had shaped it? Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Linda about the vice principal position. Something about paperwork deadlines and orientation schedules. Elise stared at the message, then at the library entrance. The number Robert had written still burned in her mind, full of possibility and promise. But so was the image of Travis bent over old newspapers, piecing together the story of the place he'd loved enough to spend his retirement savings. With a sigh, she pushed open the library door. She had time before any decisions needed to be made. And she owed it to Travis to at least understand what he'd seen in this place. Back at the Pelican Inn, Elise sat cross-legged on the window seat in Travis's study, her laptop balanced on her knees. The room still smelled like him, of old books and coffee and that sandalwood cologne he'd worn since college. Outside, afternoon storms gathered over the water, promising another summer downpour. She clicked through Coastal Realty's listings, Robert Campbell's offer burning in her mind. Similar waterfront properties were going for even more than he'd suggested. With the right marketing, the right buyers. Planning your escape already? She jumped at Jacob's voice, nearly dropping her computer. He stood in the doorway, rain dampening his shirt shoulders, a cardboard tube tucked under one arm. Don't you ever knock? Force of habit, he shrugged. Travis always said knocking in your own workspace felt too formal. At her raised eyebrow, he added quietly, he used to sit in that same spot. said the view helped him think. Elise glanced out the window. The oak trees swayed in the strengthening wind, their branches framing a perfect view of the garden and, beyond it, the water. Even overgrown, she could see why he'd chosen this spot. "Before you start whatever lecture you've got planned," she said, closing her laptop, "I'm just doing my due diligence. Getting a sense of the market." Uh-huh. Jacob crossed to Travis's old drafting table and unrolled the contents of the tube. They were blueprints, yellowed with age. "Then you'll want to see these too. Original plans from 1891, plus Travis's restoration drawings." He weighted the corners with brass paperweights she recognized from Travis's desk back in Ohio. "Your brother spent months tracking these down." Despite herself, Elise moved closer. The drawings were beautiful, detailed renderings in faded ink, showing the inn in its original glory. Wide verandas, intricate gingerbread trim, gardens that stretched all the way to the water. "The woman who built this place? Adelaide Woodward?" Jacob's finger traced the signature in the corner. "She designed it herself. Wouldn't let her husband's architects change a thing." Travis loved that story. Of course he had. Travis had always been drawn to people who defied expectations, who built things others said they couldn't. Jacob unrolled another set of drawings. These were newer and inked in Travis's familiar hand. He wanted to restore it exactly as she'd designed it. "See these notes?" He pointed to Travis's cramped writing in the margins. Every detail researched, every material period appropriate. Elise leaned closer, recognizing her brother's enthusiasm in the careful annotations. "Original heart pine flooring under modern oak," one note read. "Local craftsmen can replicate missing medallions." He'd work on these for hours. Jacob's voice softened. Deciding which projects to tackle first, sourcing materials. The garden was going to be phase 1. He found Adelaide's original planting charts in the library archives. Thunder rumbled outside as Elise studied the drawings. Travis had mapped out every room, every detail. Here was the grand staircase with its carved newel post. The parlor's coffered ceiling. The breakfast room's bay window with its view of the sunrise. He even tracked down photos of the original furniture. Jacob pulled out a folder she hadn't noticed, spreading old photographs across the drafting table. "Some of it's still here, needing restoration. The rest." He smiled slightly. "Well, your brother had a talent for finding things people said couldn't be found." In the photos, the inn was stunning. Light poured through tall windows, reflecting off polished wood and gleaming brass. Elegant without being stuffy, grand without losing its sense of welcome. "Adelaide Woodward ran this place until she was 92, Jacob said quietly. It was more than just an inn to her. It was a dream made real." Travis understood that. Elise's throat tightened. She could see what Travis had seen. Not only an old building needing repair, but a piece of history waiting to be brought back to life. A vision worth believing in. The developers would preserve the facade, she found herself saying. That's what Campbell promised. The facade. Jacob's laugh held no humor. "You really think that's what Travis wanted? To see this place turned into a shell of itself? Some fake historic backdrop for vacation homes?" "I don't know what Travis wanted." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "I didn't know him well enough anymore to know." "Yes, you do." Jacob gathered the photos carefully, sliding them back into their folder. "You just haven't let yourself look at it yet." Rain lashed against the windows now, but Elise barely noticed. Her eyes were drawn back to Travis's drawings, to his careful notes and detailed plans. To all the dreams he'd poured onto paper, believing she'd understand them someday. "I have a life in Ohio," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. So did he. Jacob rolled the blueprints carefully, sliding them back into their tube. Until he found something worth changing it for. He left her there in Travis's study, surrounded by evidence of her brother's passion for this place. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something shifted, subtle as a foundation settling, permanent as oak taking root. She opened her laptop again, but instead of property listings, she found herself searching for historic renovation grants. It was only research, she told herself. Being thorough. She owed her brother that much. Chapter 4. Jacob gripped his coffee mug tighter, trying not to make a sound as he watched Elise from the doorway. She'd been bent over Travis's plans for nearly an hour, her dark hair falling forward as she traced elevation drawings with one finger. Morning light streamed through the study windows, catching on the silver strands at her temples and turning them platinum. This was the third morning he'd found her like this, surrounded by blueprints and material samples, making notes in a leather-bound journal he recognized from Travis's collection. She still hadn't mentioned selling the place, and Jacob wasn't about to remind her. The original porch railings had a different pattern, he said, finally stepping into the room. She didn't startle, just looked up with a slight smile that suggested she'd known he was there all along. I noticed that. She tapped a section of the drawing. The current ones are simpler. Was that Travis's choice, or were they like that when he bought the place? Before Travis. Jacob set his mug down and moved closer, drawn into the familiar territory of architectural details. Previous owner replaced them in the 80s. Your brother had just commissioned replicas of the originals when. He cleared his throat. They're being handcrafted by a woodworker in Charleston. Should be ready in about 6 weeks. That was a stretch. Hank had texted last week saying the railings would be done in a month, but what was an extra 2 weeks in the grand scheme of things? The longer Elise stayed, the more chances she'd have to see what this place could become. I've been thinking about Adelaide Woodward, she said, surprising him. What it must have been like for her to design this place when women weren't supposed to do that sort of thing. Stubborn as they come, from what Travis found in the records. Jacob smiled at the memory. Apparently her husband tried to bring in architects from Savannah, and she locked them out of the property. Good for her. Elise's answering smile reached her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. Travis always did find the most interesting historical footnotes. He did. Jacob hesitated, then added, he would have loved seeing you take an interest in the place. Something suspicious like guilt flashed in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I should have visited. I kept putting it off, telling myself there would be time. She shook her head. Anyway. What's next on your repair schedule? He hadn't missed her quick change of subject, but he let it pass. The garden shed needs a new roof. Thought I'd start on that this morning while we wait for the electrician. He's backed up till next week at least. Another careful extension of the timeline. Tom had offered to come tomorrow, but Jacob had scheduled the electrician for the following Thursday instead. The wiring wasn't dangerous, just outdated. It could wait. I was hoping to clear some of the overgrowth in the garden. Elise rolled up one of the drawings. The original layout is beautiful. I found Adelaide's planting diagrams in Travis's files. Jacob tried not to show his surprise. Need a hand with that? She considered him for a moment. I wouldn't turn down someone with knowledge of the local flora. Especially the toxic varieties. I'm guessing poison ivy hasn't been eradicated since I was last here. Still flourishing, I'm afraid. He picked up his coffee mug, hiding his smile behind it. Let me check on a few things with Mike first. Then I'll grab my gloves. An hour later, he was still smiling as he pushed open the door to Mary's diner, the bell jingling a welcome that mingled with the scent of freshly baked pies and something that reminded him of his grandmother's Sunday roast coming from the kitchen. Well, if it isn't Mr. Fix-It himself. Miss Doris waved from her usual booth by the windows. Thought you'd be out at the inn all day again. Stopping for a quick bite. He slid into the booth across from her, noting the knowing look she exchanged with Mary behind the counter. What? Nothing, dear. Miss Doris stirred her tea with practiced precision. Just noticing that you've been spending an awful lot of time out at the Pelican Inn lately. More than your usual jobs. It's a complicated project. She smiled. And how is the lovely Miss Bray doing with all this complication? Jacob sighed as Mary approached with a coffee pot and a too innocent expression. Not you too. What? Mary filled his mug without being asked. Can't we take an interest in our favorite contractor's welfare? You've been working those long hours, bringing over extra supplies. Materials that Travis already ordered, he corrected, ignoring their exchanged glances. And I suppose those heritage roses at the Pelican Inn take priority over the 3 other projects you've got waiting? Miss Doris raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. Betty mentioned seeing you both at the garden center yesterday. Jacob felt heat rise in his neck that had nothing to do with the coffee. She wanted to restore the original plantings. I was helping with the heavy labor. Of course. Mary's smile widened. Like you were helping when you convinced Tom to postpone the electrical work by a week. Jacob nearly choked on his coffee. How did you? Tom's my cousin, Mary reminded him. And unlike some people, he doesn't try to hide when he's sweet on someone. I am not sweet on, Jacob broke off at their skeptical expressions. I'm giving her time to see the place's potential. Instead of rushing into a sale she might regret. Noble of you. Miss Doris patted his hand. Though I did notice Elise at the library yesterday, going through the archives. Spent 3 hours there, according to Jane. Seems like she might be taking an interest all on her own. Jacob tried to ignore the small flare of hope that ignited in his chest. She's thorough. Likes to have all the facts before making decisions. Unlike someone who jumps to conclusions about Ohio educators with silver in their hair. Miss Doris's eyes twinkled. I never said. You didn't have to, dear. She sipped her tea. Your face says plenty whenever someone mentions her name. Rather like it's doing right now. Jacob looked to Mary for rescue, but she only slid a slice of peanut butter pie in front of him with a wink. On the house. You'll need your strength for all that garden clearing. I hate small towns, he muttered, but there was no heat in it. They all knew he'd chosen Palmar Island precisely because everyone knew everyone else's business. Because places like this held on to people who needed holding on to. No, you don't. Miss Doris smiled. And neither does she, if you'd stop assuming she's already got one foot out the door. Jacob picked up his fork, focusing on the pie instead of the sudden tightness in his chest. He wasn't naive enough to believe Elise would stay because she found the inn's history interesting. Her life was in Ohio, with her vice principal job and her book club and all the things she'd worked for. Still, when he pictured her bent over those blueprints, her expression so like Travis's when he'd been lost in the possibilities of the place. You're both impossible, he said finally. That's why you love us. Mary refilled his coffee. Now eat your pie and get back to your not-so-subtle timeline extensions. We've got a pool going on. How long before she figures it out? A pool? Jacob nearly choked again. Who's in on it? Half the island, I'd say. Miss Doris's smile was serene. Though I think Miss Adelaide would have approved of your methods. Sometimes the worthwhile things need a bit of creative encouragement. The trellis lay across the garden path like a fallen giant, decades of wisteria growth having finally proven too much for the aged wood. Jacob circled it, assessing the damage while Elise knelt beside a section of intricate latticework, carefully untangling vines from the collapsed structure. We can save at least half of it, she said, fingers working nimbly through the twisted greenery. The lattice pattern matches Adelaide's original drawings. Jacob tried not to notice how the afternoon sun caught in her hair, or the streak of dirt across her cheek that somehow made her look more approachable than she had when she'd first arrived. More real. I've got cypress boards that would work for the replacement sections, he said, crouching beside her. Weather-resistant, historically accurate. Always prepared, aren't you? There was a hint of a smile in her voice. For some things. He held a section of vine while she worked it free. Travis liked to call it obsessive planning. I prefer professional foresight. Tomato, tomato. Elise sat back on her heels, surveying the tangle of wood and greenery. In my classroom, we called it being a good scout. You were a scout? Never. Too busy with books. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving another smudge of dirt. But I had the motto on a poster. Be prepared. Right next to kill a mockingbird. Jacob found himself smiling at the image. English teacher through and through. Was it that obvious? The correction of my grammar last Tuesday might have been a clue. He lifted a heavy section of the trellis, revealing more of the pattern underneath. Plus the way you've been organizing Travis's notes with tabs and margin annotations. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Old habits. Good ones. He met her eyes briefly before she looked away. Seems like being vice principal is a natural fit. That's the plan. She stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. 20 years teaching, 5 in administration, then retirement with a full pension. Sounds very predictable? Her tone held a challenge. I was going to say structured. Jacob straightened, trying to ignore the twinge in his lower back that reminded him he wasn't 20 anymore. Nothing wrong with knowing what you want. And what about you? She began separating salvageable pieces from the broken ones. What's your grand plan? The question caught him off guard. Keep doing what I'm doing, I guess. Saving buildings, one rotted floorboard at a time. No retirement in your future? Jacob laughed. Not if I can help it. I'd go crazy with nothing to fix. She studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. My grandfather was like that. Retired from the steel mill at 65, took up furniture restoration the next day. Said idle hands were the devil's workshop. Smart man. He and Travis always got along. She handed him a length of lattice. I'm starting to think Travis knew exactly what he was doing when he left me this place. Oh? Jacob studied the piece, watching her expression. He knew I couldn't resist a good puzzle. All these original features to research, historical details to uncover. She shook her head. It's like he laid out the perfect treasure hunt. And you're enjoying the hunt. It wasn't a question. More than I expected to, she admitted. But that doesn't change anything. I still have a life waiting in Ohio. He picked up another section of trellis. Hand me that saw? She passed it to him, their fingers brushing. Jacob ignored the small jolt that ran up his arm at the contact. For what it's worth, he said, focusing on the precise angle of his cut, I think you'll make a great vice principal. You've got that look. What look? The one that says, I know you can do better than that. He glanced up in time to catch her surprised smile. I imagine your students both fear and adore you. You're deflecting. Am I? You changed the subject from your lack of a retirement plan. She held the wood steady as he sawed. Classic avoidance technique. And you're analyzing my conversational patterns. He finished the cut. I'm beginning to think we're both victims of our professions. That earned him a genuine laugh, a sound he hadn't heard from her before. It transformed her face, softening the careful composure she usually maintained. Probably, she conceded. Though I prefer to think of it as playing to our strengths. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the chirp of cicadas and the distant crash of waves. Jacob found himself very aware of her movements. The precise way she measured each piece, the small furrow between her brows when she concentrated, the occasional brush of her arm against his as they maneuvered the larger sections. You know, he said eventually, I could teach you how to use the circular saw. Might come in handy for your next garden restoration. Back in Ohio. Bold of you to assume I'll have another one. But she moved closer, allowing him to position the saw in her hands, his arms coming around her to show her the proper grip. Safety first, he murmured, his voice closer to her ear than he'd intended. You want to keep your thumb here, away from the blade path. He felt rather than saw her quick intake of breath, the slight stiffening of her shoulders at his proximity. For a moment, neither of them moved. I think I've got it, she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. Jacob stepped back, giving her space. Go ahead then. She made the cut with perfect precision, her hand steady despite the faint flush that had risen on her neck. There. One skill I can take back to Ohio. Along with garden restoration and historic preservation? He kept his tone light. Your resume is expanding by the day. Not skills that translate well to a high school administrative position. She set the saw down. Though I suppose I could introduce a woodworking elective. Now there's a thought. Jacob studied the completed section of trellis. Looking good, Ms. Vice Principal. Adelaide would approve. It's just a trellis. It's part of the inn story. He met her eyes. Every piece matters. Her lips twitched into something that almost resembled a proud smile. Then she glanced away, checking her watch. I should head inside. I promised I'd call my principal about the fall scheduling. She brushed dirt from her hands. Administrative duties don't stop for garden restorations. Ohio beckons? He couldn't keep the faint edge from his voice. Reality beckons. She gathered her tools, movements suddenly brisk and efficient. This was fun, but it's temporary. You know that, right? The question hung between them, loaded with more meaning than just garden work. Jacob secured the last piece of trellis before answering. For now, he said quietly. Elise hesitated, something unreadable passing across her face. Then she shook her head, just slightly. I'll see you tomorrow. For the electrical inspection. Jacob watched her walk back toward the house, her steps quick and determined. Back to her calls and her structured life, at least for the moment. But he hadn't missed the way her hands had trembled, just slightly, when his arms had circled hers on the saw. Or how she'd lingered over Adelaide's garden plans that morning, long after she'd found the information she needed. Chapter 5. Elise was searching for Adelaide's journals when she found the album. It was tucked behind a row of renovation manuals in Travis's bookcase, a leather-bound volume she recognized immediately. Their grandmother's photo album. The one that had sat on her mahogany bookshelf for as long as Elise could remember. She'd always assumed it had been lost in the estate sale after Gran's passing. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled it free. The weight of it was familiar, comforting in a way she hadn't expected. She carried it to the window seat and traced the embossed pattern on the cover before opening it. The first photo made her breath catch. There they were, maybe 6 and 10 years old, building sandcastles on Palmar Island's beach. She had pigtails and skinned knees, concentrating fiercely on her moat construction. Travis had his arms slung around her shoulders, his smile missing 2 front teeth. Summer 76, the caption read in Gran's careful handwriting. She turned the page. More summers, more memories. Travis teaching her to fish off the pier. The time they built a fort from driftwood. Her twirling in a new sundress on the boardwalk, while Travis pretended to be a photographer, his hands framing an imaginary camera. Each image pulled her deeper into the past. Had they really been that happy? That carefree? Page after page of golden summers on the island. Collecting shells at dawn. Ice cream cones at the old parlor that was now a gift shop. The bookstore where Gran would let them each choose 1 book per vacation. And then, near the middle of the album, the tone shifted. Elise at 13, her smile forced, standing apart from the family at their rented beach cottage. Travis at 17, tall as a beanstalk, his shoulders hunched as if bracing against something. Last summer on Palmar Island, the caption noted simply. The next pages were empty for a long while, and then. Elise stared at the newer photos, her vision blurring. Travis, older, with those silver threads in his dark hair matching her own, standing proudly in front of the Pelican Inn. His arm around an older woman Elise recognized as Miss Doris. Another of him and Jacob on the porch, surrounded by lumber and blueprints, both grinning like they'd discovered buried treasure. New beginnings, Travis had written beneath it. There were more. Travis in the garden, clearing what must have been years of overgrowth. Travis in the study, surrounded by books and drawings. Travis with various locals Elise had yet to meet, all smiling, all connected to this place in ways she wasn't. The last photo stopped her cold. It was a shot of her and Travis at her 50th birthday dinner, nearly 2 years ago now. She remembered the evening, They enjoyed a quick meal between her faculty meeting and his flight back to South Carolina. She'd been distracted, checking her phone for emails from the school board about the upcoming budgetary review. He'd been trying to tell her about the inn, about his plans. She'd nodded in all the right places, asked all the expected questions, but her mind had been elsewhere. The photo captured none of that distance. Instead, it showed them leaning toward each other, laughing at something now forgotten. They looked close. Connected. Like the siblings they had once been, before life and choices and miles pulled them apart. No caption accompanied this one. Just a small note in Travis's handwriting, tucked into the album sleeve. She'll come to the inn someday. When she's ready. Something cracked inside Elise's chest. A dam she'd carefully constructed over the past weeks, holding back the full weight of her grief. She'd been so busy with the inn, with decisions and repairs and Jacob's quiet challenges, that she hadn't truly allowed herself to feel the enormity of Travis's absence. How could he have had such faith in her? After years of missed calls and shortened visits? After she'd dismissed his passion for this place as a retirement hobby, something to keep him occupied after the accounting firm? And now he was gone. Really gone. No more chances for long conversations, for shared memories, for the questions she should have asked. About why he'd chosen this particular inn. About why he'd come back to the one island she'd spent decades avoiding. The album slipped from her lap as she stood, suddenly unable to breathe within these walls that held too much of Travis's vision, too many of his hopes. She needed air and something solid beneath her feet that wasn't layered with expectations. Outside, the afternoon had turned golden, the kind of perfect coastal light that painters and photographers chased. Elise barely noticed. She moved down the small path to the beach without conscious thought, the album left open on the window seat behind her. The tide was going out, leaving wet sand perfect for walking. She moved with purpose, as if she could outpace the grief that followed like a shadow. The inn grew smaller behind her, but the weight in her chest only seemed to increase with each step. Had she ever really known her brother? The man who'd saved their grandmother's photo album, who'd bought this old inn and poured his heart into it, who'd held on to belief in their relationship long after she'd let it fade to holiday phone calls and obligatory birthday dinners? The sand grew softer as she neared the point where the beach curved around a rocky outcropping. Her pace slowed, her breath coming in shuddering gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. A piece of driftwood, bleached and smooth from years in the water, caught her eye. She sank down beside it, letting the sand take her weight as the tears finally came. For Travis, for all the conversations they'd never have, for the summers long past and the last chance he'd given her. The Pelican Inn. The sun was setting by the time Elise made her way back to the inn, her eyes gritty from tears, her throat raw. She hadn't meant to stay on the beach so long, but time had slipped away in that strange way it did when grief took the reins. The tide had turned, beginning its slow climb back up the shore, erasing her footprints as if they'd never been. She couldn't face going inside, not yet. The kitchen with its half-finished restoration, the study with the photo album still waiting. They all held too much of Travis, too many reminders of what she'd lost, what she'd never properly appreciated while she had it. Instead, she sank into one of the Adirondack chairs on the porch, drawing her knees to her chest. From here, she could watch the last light fade over the water, the sky shifting from coral to lavender to deepening blue. It was beautiful, she had to admit. The kind of view people paid good money to see. The kind Travis had chosen to wake up to every day. She wasn't sure how long she'd been sitting there when the screen door creaked open. She didn't need to turn to know it was Jacob. His footsteps had become familiar over the past weeks, solid, measured, never hurried. Without a word, he placed a steaming mug on the small table beside her chair. The scent of chamomile and honey drifted up, wrapping around her like a blanket. "Thank you," she managed, her voice rougher than she'd expected. He nodded, settling into the chair next to hers with his own mug. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sky darkened further, stars emerging like scattered diamonds above the water. "The photo album," she said finally. "You knew he had it?" "He showed me some of the photos." Jacob's voice was quiet. Mainly the ones of you two as kids. Said you were quite the shell collector. A surprised laugh escaped her. I had boxes and boxes of them. That tracks. The easy understanding in his tone made something twist in her chest. Did he talk about me a lot? Jacob seemed to consider the question carefully. Not in the way you're thinking. Not complaining or anything. He'd tell stories. Share memories. The time you taught him to waltz for his junior prom. How you were the one who convinced him to try accounting when he couldn't decide on a major. Elise wrapped her hands around the warm mug, surprised by the specificity of the memories. I'd forgotten about the waltz lessons. He hadn't. Jacob shifted in his chair. I think that's why he left you the inn. Not as some kind of guilt trip or burden, but because you were the one who helped him find his way before. He trusted your judgment, even when you weren't close. The words settled over her like the evening dew. Had Travis really seen her that way, even after all the missed calls, the shortened visits? I should have been here, she said softly. When he got sick. I should have. My daughter was 11 when my ex-wife moved her to California. Jacob's voice was so quiet she had to lean slightly to hear him. I told myself it was temporary. That eventually I'd move out there too, or they'd come back. That long-distance fatherhood was better than no fatherhood at all. Elise turned to look at him properly for the first time. His profile was outlined against the night sky, his expression unreadable in the faint porch light. I sent birthday cards, Christmas presents. Called every Sunday at the same time. He traced the rim of his mug with one finger. But I missed the swimming lessons, the science fairs, the first heartbreak. By the time she was in high school, I was a voice on the phone, a signature on checks. Now she's 26, and our conversations feel like job interviews, polite and formal, full of questions we both know the answers to. I'm sorry. The words seemed inadequate for the weight they carried. The point is, he continued after a moment, I spent years torturing myself with what I should have done differently. How I should have fought harder, moved sooner, been better. But the regret doesn't go away. It just changes shape. Becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you. Elise felt a tear slide down her cheek, cool in the evening air. How do you make it change shape? You stop fighting it. Jacob turned to face her, his eyes reflecting starlight. You acknowledge it. And then you start building something new beside it, something that matters now, today. Something that honors what was lost without letting it define what comes next. His words echoed in the space between them, mingling with the sound of waves and night insects. Elise found herself studying the lines of his face, the silver at his temples, the quiet strength in his features. Here was someone who understood loss, who carried it daily without being consumed by it. The album is sitting out, she said, her voice steadier now. If you want to see the rest of the photos. I'd like that. The simple acceptance in his tone warmed something inside her. Without thinking, she reached across the space between their chairs, her fingers finding his in the darkness. His hand was warm, solid, calloused from years of working with wood and stone. He turned it slightly, fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture that felt both protective and vulnerable. The moment expanded, the night air charged with something neither of them had named. Elise found herself leaning forward, drawn by a pull as natural and inevitable as the tide returning to shore. His eyes met hers, questioning, careful. She could almost taste the possibility on her lips. The comfort and connection that might fill the hollow spaces grief had carved. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the moment like glass. The screen glowed in the darkness. A text from Linda about the vice principal orientation meeting, just 3 weeks away now. 3 weeks until she was supposed to be back in Ohio, starting the life she'd worked toward for years. Reality crashed over her like a cold wave. What was she doing? This old inn with its endless repairs, this small coastal town, this man whose roots ran too deep to ever transplant, they weren't her life. She was leaving. The sooner the better. Elise pulled her hand away, rising from the chair with sudden urgency. I should go inside. Early day tomorrow. Jacob remained seated, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Elise. Thank you for the tea. She moved toward the door, needing space, air, the safety of distance. And for listening. Chapter 6. Jacob saw the storm coming from miles away. He'd been replacing rotted trim on the eastern section of the wraparound porch when the horizon darkened, clouds piling up like mountains over the water. Summer storms moved fast on Palmar Island, sweeping in from the Atlantic with little warning. This one looked particularly eager to make landfall. He quickly secured anything that might blow away. Inside, he found Elise in the dining room, a ladder positioned beneath one of the original chandelier mounts. Storm's coming, he said, watching her stretch to measure the ceiling medallion. A big one. She glanced toward the windows, where the light had already changed from golden afternoon to an eerie, greenish gray. How long do we have? 20 minutes, maybe less. I'll help you get the tools inside. They worked efficiently, moving in tandem without needing much discussion. Jacob tried not to notice how things had shifted between them since that night on the porch 3 days ago. The almost moment that had hung in the air until her phone buzzed. Since then, Elise had been polite but distant, focusing on the restoration with renewed determination, as if she could renovate away whatever had nearly happened between them. The first heavy drops hit the metal roof as they carried in the last of the sawhorses. Within seconds, the rain intensified, drumming overhead with growing urgency. I was hoping to finish that section of porch trim today, Jacob said, frowning at the darkening sky. Just got the new gingerbread pieces installed yesterday. They'll be fine, Elise assured him. It's just rain. As if in answer, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, followed by an ominous thud from the direction of the east porch. The lights flickered briefly, then steadied. Jacob was already moving. That didn't sound like just rain. The wind had picked up, driving sheets of water against the windows as they made their way to the front of the house. Through the parlor windows, Jacob could see the problem immediately. A large oak branch had broken off and crashed onto the eastern section of the porch roof, the very area he'd been working on all week. That's not good, he muttered, watching water pour through the damaged section, soaking his newly installed decorative trim. It's going to warp if we don't cover it. I'll get some tarps, Elise offered, already turning toward the hall closet where he kept emergency supplies. Wait, Jacob called after her. We should check the blue guest room upstairs first. There's a weak spot in the roof over that corner. It always leaks during storms like this. Elise frowned. You didn't mention that during our initial inspection. It wasn't raining during our initial inspection, he said. Another boom of thunder rattled the windows, and the lights flickered again. Let's hope we don't lose power, Elise said as they headed for the stairs. There's a generator out back if we do. Inside the blue guest room, Jacob's prediction was immediately confirmed. Water was already streaming through a corner of the ceiling, creating a growing puddle on the hardwood floor beneath. This spot always leaks during heavy storms, Jacob explained, setting down his toolbox. The previous owner tried patching it multiple times, but it's a design flaw in how the roofline meets at this corner. And you were planning to tell me about this when? Elise asked, hands on her hips. Jacob at least had the grace to look slightly abashed. It was on Travis's repair list for next month. We were going to have to take up part of the roof to fix it properly. Of course it was, she muttered, but was already moving to help as he pulled out a tarp. So what's the temporary fix? Same thing we've been doing for 2 years, divert and contain, he said, unfurling the blue plastic. Until we can tackle the real repair. They worked quickly, positioning a tarp to catch the water and channel it into a large bucket. The sound of water hitting the metal created an odd, percussive accompaniment to the thunder. This is ridiculous, Elise said, but there was a hint of laughter in her voice. It's like we're conducting some weird rainwater symphony. Welcome to historic home ownership. Jacob steadied the ladder as she climbed up to secure one corner of the tarp to the curtain rod. Every storm reveals the sins of previous repairs. A particularly vicious gust of wind rattled the shutters, and the lights gave up their brave fight, plunging the house into gray dimness. Where did you say that generator was? Elise's voice floated down from the ladder. Out back. But we'd better deal with that branch on the porch first. Save what we can of the restoration work. As she descended the ladder, Jacob moved to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The branch is right on top of the new trim. If we don't get it off and cover the area, all that work will be ruined. Let's secure this leak, then tackle the porch before more damage is done, she suggested. They spread a few more towels around the bucket to catch any overflow, then headed downstairs. Jacob grabbed his rain jacket from a hook by the back door, tossing Elise a spare windbreaker. These will help, but we're still going to get soaked, he warned. They stepped out onto the still-protected section of the wraparound porch. The rain was coming down in sheets now, driven sideways by the wind. From here, they could see the full extent of the damage. The large oak branch had crashed through the decorative railing and now lay partially on the porch roof. If we can get that branch off, I can cover the damaged trim, Jacob shouted over the storm. But it's going to be slippery. Elise was already pulling on work gloves from his tool belt. Tell me what to do. Working together, they managed to carefully lift the branch away from the damaged section and lower it to the ground beside the porch steps. Hold this, Jacob instructed, handing Elise one end of a tarp while he secured the other to the undamaged section of railing. Together, they created a temporary shelter over the newly installed trim, protecting it from the worst of the rain. By the time they finished, they were both drenched, rain running in rivulets down their faces despite the jackets. Let's check upstairs again, Jacob said, leading the way back inside. Their makeshift system in the blue room was holding, though the bucket was nearly half full. As they emptied and replaced it, Elise burst into unexpected laughter. I can't believe I'm finding this funny, she said, adding a second bucket. Do you know how much water damage costs to repair? About as much as a vice principal's monthly salary? Jacob ventured, unable to resist. She shot him a look, but her smile remained. At least. But how many administrators can say they've rescued century-old trim during a coastal storm? Not many, Jacob agreed, helping her spread towels around the buckets. Their movements had become synchronized, anticipating each other's needs without discussion. Though I'd call this more of a strategic retreat than a victory. Very diplomatic. Elise pushed damp hair from her face, her eyes bright in the flashlight's beam. We should get out of these wet clothes, Jacob said, then immediately felt heat rise in his neck. I mean, you should, I'll go check on the generator. Elise bit her lip, clearly suppressing a smile at his flustered correction. I think we'd both earned dry clothes and something warm to drink. Generator's a lost cause for tonight, Jacob said, setting down more candles from the box of emergency supplies he'd found in the pantry. Shed doors jammed. We'll have to wait until morning. The flickering light transformed the kitchen, softening the edges of the old cabinets and casting dancing shadows across the walls. Travis always was prepared, he added, pouring them each another half glass of wine. The bottle was nearly empty now, and the storm had settled into a steady, less frantic rhythm. Occasional thunder still rumbled, but distantly, as if the worst had moved offshore. He would have enjoyed this, Elise said, gesturing to their makeshift hurricane party, candles, wine, and the remains of cheese and crackers they'd found in the refrigerator. The adventure of it all. Jacob studied her across the table, her face golden in the candlelight. The storm had washed away her usual reserve, leaving something softer, more open. Her hair had dried in loose waves around her face, and she'd borrowed one of Travis's old flannel shirts over her own dry clothes, the sleeves rolled up several times at the wrists. You remind me of him, you know. The words slipped out before he could consider them. Not in the obvious ways. But in how you tackle problems. He'd assess, adapt, find solutions and make it seem like part of some grand adventure. She smiled, fingers tracing the rim of her glass. I'm not sure I see the resemblance. Travis jumped into things with both feet. I'm more of a calculated risk-taker? Jacob suggested. You might plan more, but when it comes down to it, you don't hesitate. Like today with the storm. The candles flickered as a gust of wind pushed against the windows. In the momentary dimming, her expression shifted to something more thoughtful, more vulnerable. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Something I've been wondering since I found that photo album." "Of course. Why did you help Travis with this place?" "From what Miss Doris says, you had plenty of work already. More lucrative projects." "Why this one?" Jacob set his glass down, considering. "Because he saw what this place could be. Not just as a renovation project or a business opportunity, but as part of preserving something that matters." He paused, then added quietly, "And because he loved it here." "Like you did." Her eyes met his, questioning. "What makes you think I loved it here?" "The way you talk about those summers. The way you moved right into fixing that garden, like you were picking up something you set down temporarily." He leaned forward slightly. "The way you stepped onto that porch in the middle of a storm without hesitation, because something here mattered to you." The candlelight caught the pulse at her throat, the slight widening of her eyes. "I think you belong here, Elise." Jacob's voice was low, just audible above the rain. "Not because Travis left you the inn. Not because of those childhood memories. But because of who you are now, today." He reached across the table, his fingers nearly touching hers. Elise's breath caught. For once, she didn't immediately look away, didn't deflect with a practical observation or a reminder of her life waiting in Ohio. Something in her expression softened, opened. "Jacob, I..." The crash came without warning, a tremendous splintering of glass and wood as something large hurtled through the dining room window. Wind and rain rushed in, instantly extinguishing the nearest candles and sending paper swirling across the floor. They were both on their feet in an instant, the moment between them shattered as completely as the window. "Stay here," Jacob ordered, already moving toward the sound, grabbing a flashlight from the counter. But Elise was right behind him, her own light finding the source of the destruction. A massive tree limb had punched through one of the dining room's bay windows, bringing glass, rain, and debris with it. "So much for the storm moving on," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Chapter 7. 2 days after the storm, Elise stood in what had once been the dining room, surveying the damage with growing dismay. The tree branch had been removed, but the broken window remained boarded up, casting the room in perpetual shadow. Water damage stained the hardwood floors, a constellation of dark patches spreading outward from where the branch had landed. "Doesn't look as bad as it could have been," Jacob said, coming to stand beside her. His voice was carefully neutral, the same tone he'd been using since that night. Since his quiet declaration and her interrupted response. Since everything between them had shifted into uncertain territory. "Not as bad?" Elise gestured at the floor, the boarded window, the soaked wallpaper beginning to peel at the seams. "Jacob, this is at least another 3 weeks of repairs. Maybe more. Glass supplier says they can get period-appropriate replacements, but it'll take time. These aren't standard sizes. The latest setback in an ever-growing list." Elise pressed her fingers to her temples, where a headache had been building since morning. The amount of money hemorrhaging into this place was staggering, especially with no income to offset it. Every day was another expense, another delay, another reason to question what she was still doing here. Her phone buzzed. An email notification from Riverside High. The third reminder about the administrative orientation that was now just 2 weeks away. The life she'd worked for waiting patiently while she remained trapped in this limbo, unable to fully commit to staying or going. "I can't do this," she said, more to herself than Jacob. "The window?" he asked, misunderstanding. "We can. Any of it." She turned to face him, something inside her snapping like a rope pulled too taut. "The constant repairs, the endless problems, the money pit this place has become. Every time we fix one thing, 2 more break. It's like the universe is sending me an extremely unsubtle message." Jacob's expression hardened slightly. "Old houses take time. Time we don't have." She regretted the "we" as soon as it slipped out. "I don't have time," she corrected. "My orientation starts in 2 weeks. I have a career waiting, responsibilities, a life I've built. You could have a life here too." His voice remained calm, measured, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands slipped into his pockets. If you'd let yourself consider it. Consider what, exactly? Pouring my retirement fund into a building that's literally falling apart around us? Giving up a career I've worked 20 years for? All because you think I belong here? The words came out harsher than she'd intended, sharpened by fear and uncertainty. By the truth of how much his words that night had affected her, how dangerously close she'd come to believing them. Jacob's jaw tightened. I never asked you to give up anything. Didn't you? The dam had broken now, all her confusion and frustration pouring out. The way you keep finding more problems, extending timelines, making sure I can't possibly finish before fall semester begins? The way you conveniently forgot to mention that roof leak until we were in the middle of a storm? Jacob's face had gone very still. You think I'm manipulating you? I think you're trying to honor Travis's wishes. I think you believe you know what's best for this place. She took a breath. And I think you've been deliberately dragging out repairs to buy time, hoping I'll magically decide to stay and continue his vision. The silence that followed felt deafening. Well, he said finally, his voice unnervingly quiet. At least we know where we stand. Jacob? No. He raised a hand, stopping her. You've made yourself perfectly clear. He pulled a set of papers from his back pocket, revised estimates for the remaining repairs. Everything you need is here. Contractor contacts, schedule projections, cost breakdowns. Handle it however you see fit. He placed the papers on the dust-covered dining table. I'll clear out my tools by this evening. That's not, Elise started, but he was already moving toward the door, his movements controlled, deliberate. For what it's worth, he said, pausing in the doorway, I never lied about the repairs. This place needs the time and care I've given it. His eyes met hers, and the hurt she saw there made her chest ache. And I thought you saw that too. The front door closed behind him with a soft, final click. Elise stood motionless in the empty dining room, the magnitude of what had just happened washing over her. She'd pushed away the one person who truly understood what this place could be, who had worked alongside Travis to save it, who had seen something in her that she'd been too afraid to acknowledge in herself. But wasn't that the right choice? To cut ties now, before she let herself be swayed by sentimentality or, worse, by whatever had been growing between them? Her phone buzzed again. Another email, this time from Linda, asking about moving arrangements, offering to help her pack up her classroom before the new teacher arrived. Real life, continuing without her. With sudden resolve, she pulled Robert Campbell's business card from her wallet and dialed. Ms. Bray, his smooth voice answered on the second ring. What a pleasant surprise. I've made a decision, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm accepting the developer's offer. As is, no contingencies. There was a brief pause. Well, that is good news. Though I should mention, given the storm damage reported in the area, they might want to adjust. The original offer or nothing, Elise cut in. They want the location, not the building. The condition of the inn doesn't matter to them. I'll convey your terms immediately, Campbell said, his tone warming considerably. I expect we can have paperwork drawn up within the week. The sooner the better. She ended the call and sat down. It was done. The practical, sensible decision made. No more uncertainty, no more pouring money into endless repairs, no more feeling things she had no business feeling for a man as rooted to this place as the ancient oaks outside. The hollow ache in her chest would pass. She was 52 years old, for heaven's sake, not some lovesick teenager. She'd built a life without romantic entanglements before and had been perfectly content. She would be again. The sudden knock at the front door startled her. For one wild moment, she thought Jacob had returned. Her heart leapt traitorously at the thought. But it was Miss Doris who stood on the porch, a covered dish in her hands, her expression grave. I passed Jacob on the road, she said without preamble. Thought you might need this after the trouble from the storm. She handed over the dish, something that smelled of cinnamon and butter. I'm fine, Elise said automatically, stepping back to let her in. Of course you are, dear. Miss Doris's tone made it clear she didn't believe that for a moment. She followed Elise to the kitchen, taking in the half-completed renovations with a critical eye. I see you've made your decision. Elise set the dish on the counter. How do you know that? When you've lived as long as I have, you recognize the look of someone who's convinced themselves they're doing the right thing, even when every instinct is screaming otherwise. She settled into a kitchen chair as if she owned it. And Jacob doesn't walk away from a project unless there's nothing left for him to do. Or no one willing to let him do it. The simple truth of the observation made Elise's chest tighten. She busied herself finding plates, avoiding Miss Doris's too perceptive gaze. I just got off the phone with Robert Campbell, she said finally. I'm accepting the developer's offer. Miss Doris nodded slowly, as if this merely confirmed what she already suspected. So Coastal Realty wins after all. They've been circling this property since before Travis bought it. It is the right thing, Elise said, more to herself than Miss Doris. The practical thing. I have responsibilities, a career. This place it's just too much. Miss Doris smoothed her skirt, her eyes never leaving Elise's face. You know, when you sell to these developers, you're not just losing the inn. I'm not losing anything. I'm making a sound financial decision. You're losing the community that would have embraced you, given half a chance. The history your brother was fighting to preserve. The future he saw for this place. She paused, her voice softening. And unless I'm very much mistaken, you're losing a man who sees in you what the rest of us have glimpsed these past weeks, someone who belongs here, whether she wants to admit it or not. The words hit too close to Jacob's confession, to all the things Elise had been fighting against since that night. I have a life in Ohio, she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. Yes, you do. Miss Doris rose, her point made. Like Travis had a life in that accounting firm. A good life, a stable life. She moved toward the door. Until he found something that mattered more. She paused in the doorway, much as Jacob had earlier. The cobbler's in that dish. It's still warm. Comfort food, she added with a small smile. For when you're ready to admit you might not be as fine as you claim. After she left, Elise stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the renovation her brother had started and she would never finish. The silence pressed in, broken only by the sound of her phone buzzing yet again. The outside world demanding her attention, her return. She should feel relieved, she told herself. The decision was made. The path forward, clear. No more uncertainty, no more being pulled in two directions. So why did finalizing the sale feel not like freedom, but like loss? It's the right choice, she said aloud to the empty kitchen, but the words echoed back to her, unconvincing and hollow. Chapter 8. Jacob levered another nail from the shattered window frame, the wood splintering despite his care. 2 days after the storm, and the damage looked worse in the clear morning light, warped floorboards, water-stained walls, and the gaping wound where the bay window had once graced the dining room. He'd told Elise he was done. Had walked out with every intention of staying away. Yet here he was at dawn, working alone before she'd wake, fixing what he could while avoiding the woman inside. Professional obligation, he told himself. Finishing what he'd started for Travis's sake. The lie rang hollow, even in his own mind. A car passed on the drive, slowing briefly before continuing on. Not Elise's. Part of him had hoped it might be, coming back from an early morning walk to find him here, to talk, to clear the air. But she'd made herself perfectly clear. He was manipulating her, stretching timelines, playing games with repairs to keep her here. The accusation still stung like salt in an open wound. He yanked another nail free with more force than necessary, nearly losing his balance on the ladder. The truth was, yes, he'd hoped she'd stay, had deliberately scheduled certain repairs to give her time to see what he saw in this place. But not to trap her, never that. Only to give her the chance to discover for herself what Travis had known all along. That she belonged here. That the inn needed her as much as she needed it. He moved to the next section of damaged frame, his tools moving automatically while his mind circled the same thoughts it had been chasing for days. The hurt in her eyes when she'd accused him. The way her voice had caught when she talked about her life in Ohio. The distance she'd maintained since that night in the candlelight when he'd confessed what he truly believed. That she belonged here. What he hadn't said, what he hadn't fully admitted even to himself until this moment, was that he wanted her to belong here with him. Jacob stilled, the realization washing over him like the morning tide. It wasn't just about the inn, or about honoring Travis's vision. It never had been. He was in love with Elise Bray. In love with her sharp mind and careful planning. The way she studied architectural drawings with the same focused attention she gave to historic garden designs. How she'd wade into storm damage without hesitation, practical and fearless. The rare but transformative smile that lit her entire face when something delighted her. He'd fallen for a woman who had one foot out the door from the moment she arrived, whose life was waiting for her across the country, who saw this place as an obligation to be discharged rather than a home to be reclaimed. A woman who believed he was manipulating her, keeping her here against her will. The irony wasn't lost on him. After years of keeping people at arm's length, of focusing on work rather than relationships, he'd fallen for the one person guaranteed to leave. From inside the inn came the sound of movement. Elise beginning her day. Jacob gathered his tools quickly. He'd promised to clear out, to let her handle things her way. Finding him here, working on repairs he'd told her she'd need to manage herself, would only confirm her suspicions about his motives. As he descended the ladder, his gaze caught on the garden. The space was cleared of storm debris now. The heritage plants they'd selected together were still standing despite the wind and rain. Even in its half-restored state, it was beautiful, promising. Like the inn itself. Like what might have been between them, if things had been different. Jacob was securing a temporary cover over the damaged window when he heard the crunch of tires on the shell drive. He glanced at his watch. Just past noon. Too early for the glass supplier, who wasn't scheduled until later this afternoon. He turned to see Elise's car pulling up, slowing to a stop beside his truck. For a moment, she just sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring straight ahead as if gathering courage. Then she stepped out, squinting against the midday sun. "I thought you'd left," she said, approaching the porch where he stood. "Cleared out your tools." "Most of them." Jacob set down the hammer he'd been using. "Just finishing up a few safety measures." She nodded, her eyes taking in his progress. The temporary plywood covering the window opening, the cleared debris, the protected flooring. She looked tired, shadows beneath her eyes suggesting she'd slept about as well as he had. "We need to talk," she said finally. "I think we said plenty the other day." "I said plenty. Most of it unfair." She climbed the porch steps, stopping a careful distance away. "I came to apologize." Jacob stilled, caught off guard by her directness. He'd expected more accusations, maybe a formal dismissal from the project. Not this. "I shouldn't have said what I did," she continued when he didn't respond. "About you manipulating the timelines, trying to keep me here. I can see now that you were trying to orchestrate things for my good. To give us more time, to give me the space to discover what this place could mean to me. To find my way home. Wasn't it manipulation, though?" He set down his tools entirely, turning to face her. "I did hope you'd stay. Did schedule things to give you time to see what I see in this place." "Maybe a little," she admitted with a small smile. "But it was the kind that comes from caring, not controlling. You saw something I couldn't see yet. That I belonged here. And you gave me the gift of time to figure that out for myself." The honesty in her voice disarmed him. This wasn't the composed, cautious Elise he was used to. This was someone more vulnerable, more open, more willing to acknowledge the complexity of what had been growing between them. "I drove into town this morning," she said, moving to the porch railing, her back to him now. "To sign the sale papers. Everything was ready. The offer, the terms, the timeline for closing." Jacob's chest tightened. So she'd made her decision after all. He braced himself for what was coming. I sat there in Campbell's office for nearly an hour, she continued. Pen in hand, papers in front of me. And I couldn't do it. She turned back to him, and the raw emotion in her eyes caught him by surprise. I kept thinking about what you said about belonging here. About what Travis saw in this place. Her hands gripped the railing behind her. And then I kept thinking about everything I'd be giving up if I stayed. The vice principal position I've worked toward for years. My friends, my book club, the life I've built. Jacob waited, sensing she needed to get these words out without interruption. I feel torn in half, she admitted, her voice catching. Between what I planned and what I might want now. Between the safe choice and the one that terrifies me. Why does it terrify you? Jacob asked quietly. Because it's unplanned. Unpredictable. She met his eyes directly. Because it means starting over at 52, taking a risk on a place that needs so much from me. On people who, she stopped, looked away. Understanding dawned. This wasn't just about the inn. It was about him. About what had been growing between them since that first contentious meeting. We all have to make choices, Elise. He moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of amber in her hazel eyes. But they don't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to choose between stability and happiness. Don't I? No. He shook his head. You just have to be honest about what you want. The rest, the how, the when, the practical details, those can be figured out. It's not that simple. It can be. He took her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. If what you want is to go back to Ohio, to the life you built there, then go. No regrets, no looking back. But if what you want is here. His voice softened. Then stay. Not for Travis or for me or for some obligation you feel. Stay because it's what you want. Her fingers tightened around his. And if what I want is complicated? If it's both? Then we figure it out. Together. He moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in her eyes, the unspoken question in them. Life doesn't come with a perfect blueprint, Elise. Sometimes the most beautiful renovations happen when you have to adapt the plans. A smile tugged at her lips. Now you sound like Travis. Worse people to sound like. She laughed softly, and something in the sound broke the last of his resistance. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. I'm not good at unplanned, she whispered, but she was leaning into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. I'm not good at leaving, he countered. Seems like we both have things to learn. The space between them had narrowed to almost nothing. He could feel her breath, see the pulse at her throat, the way her lips parted slightly in anticipation. Jacob, she said, so softly he almost didn't hear it. And then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her, it didn't matter which. What mattered was the warmth of her lips against his, the way her hands moved to his shoulders, pulling him closer. What mattered was how right it felt, how inevitable, as if they'd been moving toward this moment since she first stepped out of her car weeks ago. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his, eyes closed, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I still don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. None of us do. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. We just keep working on it. Day by day. Like a restoration. Like a home being brought back to life, one careful repair at a time. Chapter 9. Elise woke to sunlight streaming through the guest room curtains, the familiar weight of indecision noticeably absent for the first time since arriving on the island. Outside, birds called to each other in the garden, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the rhythmic sound of hammering. Jacob was already at work despite yesterday's revelations. Despite the kiss that had changed everything and nothing all at once. She smiled into her pillow, allowing herself a moment of quiet joy before the practical matters of the day demanded her attention. There was so much to do, so many arrangements to make, emails to send. Choices to confirm. But for once, the lengthy to-do list didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like building something. Like restoration. By mid-morning, she'd settled at the kitchen table with her laptop, a steaming mug of coffee, and a notepad already filled with lists. The local school district website was open on her screen, their employment page displaying an unexpected gift, an opening in the English department at Palmar Island High School. The position would mean a pay cut from the vice principal role in Ohio, but the cost of living here was lower. It could work. She'd just finished drafting her application email when Jacob appeared in the doorway, his t-shirt bearing evidence of the morning's work. "Productive morning?" he asked, nodding toward her laptop as he poured himself coffee. "Very." She turned the screen toward him. "Turns out Palmar Island High School needs an English teacher. Their previous one is moving to Charleston." She hesitated. "It's not administration, but you'd be teaching again." Jacob leaned against the counter, studying her. "Is that what you want?" The question was simple, but the care with which he asked it, the absence of assumption or expectation, made something warm unfurl in her chest. "I think it might be." She closed the laptop. "I'd been so focused on moving up the career ladder, I forgot why I started teaching in the first place. I missed the classroom more than I wanted to admit." He nodded, understanding without judgment. "What about you?" she asked. "Still willing to work with a client who accused you of manipulation?" His smile was slow, a little crooked. "Depends on the client." "Fair enough." She drew a line through one item on her list. "I've been thinking about realistic timelines. Not the artificial ones you may or may not have created," this with a pointed but teasing look, "but actual project milestones. If we prioritize the guest rooms, we might be able to open for limited bookings by spring." Huh?" The warmth in his voice made her look up. "Is that presumptuous?" "Not at all." He set down his mug and reached for something he'd left by the door. "A flat, wrapped package." "Actually, I was hoping you'd say that." Curious, she accepted the package, carefully removing the brown paper. Inside was a framed set of blueprints. They were the original plans for the Pelican Inn, carefully preserved and professionally mounted. "Jacob, this is..." She traced the delicate lines with her fingertip, taking in the details she'd come to know these past weeks. "It's perfect. Thought it might look good in the front office. Once we get that far." The casual way he spoke of future plans, of shared projects, made her smile. "I need to call Linda," she said. "Let her know I won't be coming back." "Nervous?" "A little." She set the blueprints carefully on the table. "But it feels right. For the first time in a long time, I'm making a choice because I want to, not because it's what I'm supposed to do next." "That's how Travis described it," Jacob said softly. "When he decided to stay." The mention of her brother brought a pang, but not the sharp grief of before. Something gentler now, tempered by purpose. "I wish I'd understood sooner." "You understand now. That's what matters." Elise reached for her phone, but hesitated. "Would you mind if I made this call privately? Linda's going to have a lot of questions, and some of them will be about you." The look he gave her was both amused and warm. "Should I be worried?" "Depends how you feel about being thoroughly analyzed by a high school guidance counselor with 20 years' experience." Terrifying. But he smiled as he gathered his tools. "I'll be on the porch when you're ready to continue our renovation planning. Take your time." After he left, Elise took a deep breath and dialed. Linda answered on the second ring. "Tell me you haven't done anything rash," her friend said by way of greeting. "Define rash." "Oh, Elise." Linda's sigh was audible even through the phone. "The vice principal position? The retirement plan? Everything you've been working toward for a decade?" "I'm taking a different position. Here on the island." She traced the outline of the blueprint with her free hand. "It feels right, Linda. For the first time since Travis died, something feels truly right." A pause. "And does that something involve a certain contractor?" Elise laughed. Partly. But it's more than that. It's the inn, the island, the memories. The possibility of building something new while honoring what came before. You sound different, Linda said finally. Happier. I think I am. There was another pause, longer this time. You know Carol's going to be spitting mad at you for abandoning the book club. She'll forgive me when she sees the guest rooms I'm setting aside for your visits. By the time she ended the call, the sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the kitchen floor. Through the window, she could see Jacob on the porch, reviewing what looked like material samples. Waiting for her, patient as always. She gathered her notebook with its growing lists and joined him, settling into the chair beside his. Linda sends her regards. And warns you that she has a black belt in verbal sparring, which she'll demonstrate when she visits. I'll consider myself warned. He glanced at her. How did she take it? Better than expected. Though she's already planning to interrogate you thoroughly. Elise opened her notebook to a fresh page. I was thinking about the color scheme for the front parlor. Adelaide's notes mentioned a specific shade of blue. Jacob's hand found hers as they studied her notes together, his fingers warm and certain against hers. Outside, the tide was coming in, waves whispering against the shore in the same rhythm they had for centuries. The same rhythm that had called Travis back, that had finally reached her too. You know this won't be easy, Jacob said after a while. The inn, the teaching position, us. All of it will take work. I know. She turned to face him fully. But I'm not afraid of work. Never have been. No, he agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. That was never your problem. And what was my problem, exactly? His smile deepened. Being afraid of wanting something you couldn't plan for. The simple truth of it might have stung once. Now it felt like recognition, like being seen clearly and accepted anyway. And what about you? Still afraid of caring about someone who might leave? Terrified, he admitted. But willing to take the risk. That makes two of us. She leaned closer, drawn by the certainty in his eyes. Partners, then? In restoration. His hand tightened around hers. In everything. The kiss was different this time. Not the revelation of yesterday but a promise, a beginning. A foundation being laid stone by stone, as carefully and thoroughly as the inn itself had been built a century ago. When they broke apart, Elise looked past him to the inn stretching behind them, to the garden beginning to take shape again, to the horizon beyond where sky met water in an endless blue line. For the first time since arriving, she didn't see all the work that needed to be done, the endless repairs and decisions. She saw home. And this time, she was staying. Epilogue. Palmar Island, 1 year later. The Winslow party is arriving this afternoon, Elise said, checking the reservation book while balancing a cup of coffee in her other hand. I put them in the blue room and the garden suite as requested. Dawn light filtered through the restored bay windows, casting the Pelican Inn's front parlor in a soft golden glow. Outside, summer had returned in full force, azaleas blazing along the garden paths, wisteria draping the restored trellis in lavender cascades, the air heavy with jasmine and salt. A full year of backbreaking work, unexpected challenges, and long days had transformed the once neglected building into the vision Travis had first seen. The original heart pine floors gleamed beneath carefully chosen rugs. The fireplaces had been restored to working order, their carved medallions telling the history of the island to each new guest. Vintage fixtures cast warm light over period-appropriate furnishings, each room a thoughtful blend of past and present. And the Rhodes family is in the East Wing? Jacob asked, looking up from the summer maintenance schedule he was reviewing. Yes, the connecting rooms they requested, Elise confirmed. Father, daughter, son-in-law, and grandson. It's our first multi-generational booking. The inn's finally becoming what Travis envisioned, Jacob said with satisfaction. A place for families, for memories. Speaking of which, Elise said, glancing at the clock, I promised to meet Linda for coffee before she heads back to Ohio tomorrow. Last day of her summer visit and she's already planning the next one. Give her my best, Jacob said, coming to stand behind her chair, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Tell her I'm still grateful she was okay with you staying. I'm pretty sure my decision had more to do with a certain contractor who kept finding ways to extend the renovation schedule, she teased, tilting her head back to look up at him. Pure coincidence, he insisted, but his eyes crinkled with a smile that admitted everything. Her first year as teaching at Palmar Island High School had ended last week, bringing with it a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. The students had been curious and engaging, the faculty welcoming, and she'd rediscovered her passion for teaching in a way she hadn't anticipated. The rhythm of the school year had provided structure to balance the unpredictability of an ownership. The perfect combination of stability and adventure. Don't forget, Jacob said as she gathered her purse, we're heading to the lighthouse at sunset. Just the two of us, like we planned. 7 o'clock, she confirmed. I promised Miss Doris I'd be back in time for her to head home, but she said she could handle things if we ran late. She's been suspiciously eager to help lately, Jacob observed with a raised eyebrow. When isn't she? Elise laughed, pressing a quick kiss to his cheek before heading out. The morning air was fresh and sweet as she stepped outside, the scent of salt and jasmine reminding her how much she loved the island at this time of year. She'd been on Palmar Island for a full year now, transitioning from reluctant inheritor to innkeeper and teacher, finding her place in this community that had embraced her as one of their own. Linda's visit this past week had been a welcome connection to her old life, her friend bringing news of their Ohio colleagues along with her characteristic blunt assessments of Elise's new situation. You know, I came prepared to drag you back home if you seemed unhappy, Linda had confessed over wine their first evening. But seeing you here, with Jacob, with this place. I've never seen you more yourself. Those words had settled something in Elise, confirming what she'd already known in her heart. This wasn't just where she lived now. It was where she belonged. The abandoned lighthouse stood sentinel over the tiny island just off Palmar's western shore, its white tower gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Elise stepped from the small boat Jacob had borrowed, careful on the weathered dock that few people used these days. The remote islet was technically off-limits to visitors, but Jacob knew the local fishermen who maintained unofficial access to the historic structure. Not a tourist in sight, she remarked as they made their way up the overgrown shell path, the lighthouse rising before them in solitary splendor. That's the idea, Jacob replied with a smile. I wanted someplace special. Someplace that means something to the island's history. The inn summer season had officially begun 3 days ago, with all 6 rooms booked solid through August. The success felt both validating and slightly overwhelming, proof that Travis's vision had been sound, that their hard work this past year had been worthwhile. 1 year, she said softly, gazing out toward where they could see the inn's red tin roof and white clapboard siding nestled among the ancient oaks. I can hardly believe it. 1 year since you stormed into my renovation, he teased. And turned everything upside down. I did not storm, she protested with a laugh. I arrived with perfectly reasonable questions about why my brother left me a money pit. And now? Now I know exactly why he left it to me. She turned to face him fully. He knew I needed to find my way home, even if I didn't realize it yet. Jacob reached into his pocket, withdrawing something small that caught the fading sunlight. I found this in the attic a few months ago, buried under some old papers. Adelaide Woodward's original house key. He placed it in her palm, a heavy brass skeleton key, intricately patterned and aged to a rich patina. Attached to it was a delicate silver chain. Jacob, this is. She traced the pattern with her fingertip, moved by the history it represented. I had it restored, he said quietly. Thought you might like to wear it. A reminder that some things are meant to find their way home, even after a long time away. As she looked up from the key, she found him kneeling before her, something else in his hand now. A small velvet box. Elise Bray, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, I'm not just asking you to marry me, though I am definitely asking that. I'm asking you to continue building this life with me, the inn, the community, all of it. The plans we make together and the ones we haven't even thought of yet. He opened the box, revealing a ring that took her breath away. The vintage setting held a perfect sapphire the color of the ocean at dawn, small diamonds glittering alongside it like breaking waves. It was my grandmother's, he explained. She always said it belonged to a woman who knew her own mind and wasn't afraid to follow her heart. Elise felt tears gathering, but for once made no attempt to hide them. That doesn't sound like me at all, she said with a watery laugh. Or at least, not the me I was when I first came here. No, he agreed, his smile deepening the lines around his eyes that she'd grown to love. But it sounds exactly like the you that you'd become. The you I fell in love with more each day. The church bells sounded in the distance, marking the hour. Behind them, the sky had deepened to crimson and purple, the first stars appearing like scattered diamonds. So what do you say? Jacob asked. Ready for another adventure? One we build together? Elise looked from the key in her palm to the ring in the box to the man kneeling before her. The man who had seen what she could be before she saw it herself. Who had given her space to find her way home. Yes, she said simply. Then, with growing certainty, yes to all of it. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, as his arms encircled her and his lips found hers, Elise thought of the path that had led her here. The unexpected inheritance that had seemed like such a burden. The brother whose final gift had been not just the inn, but the chance to rediscover herself, to build something new from something old and cherished. Back at the inn later that evening, they found Miss Doris in the front parlor with two women who had just checked in. Ah, there you are. Miss Doris called. I'd like you to meet our guests. This is Margot Winslow and her friend Daphne Hollister. They're here for a well-deserved vacation, aren't you, dears? 2 weeks of nothing but beach, books, and relaxation, Margot confirmed with a warm smile. It's been far too long since I visited Palmar Island. It has a way of drawing people back, Elise said, extending her hand, the sapphire on her finger catching the lamplight. Miss Doris gasped, grabbing Elise's hand. Is that what I think it is? Jacob slipped an arm around Elise's waist. If you think it's an engagement ring, then yes. Amidst the congratulations and excitement, Elise noticed the two new guests watching with warm smiles from across the parlor. We're interrupting your check-in, she said apologetically, turning to the women. Margot and Daphne, right? I hope you'll be comfortable in the blue room and garden suite. They're perfect, Margot assured her, her eyes taking in the carefully restored details of the inn. It's remarkable how much of the original character you've preserved. I stayed on the island once, years ago, but the inn was closed then. Oh? Miss Doris perked up, always alert for a story. Was it a pleasant visit? A soft, almost wistful smile touched Margot's lips. Very. I met someone special that summer. It was one of those perfect moments in time that you never quite forget. Her friend Daphne turned to her in surprise. You never mentioned that. Who was he? Ancient history now, Margot replied with a small laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was more than 30 years ago. Miss Doris caught Elise's eye across the room, a speculative gleam surfacing that Elise had come to recognize as trouble. Well, Elise said, discreetly ushering Jacob toward the door, we'll let you all get settled in. Breakfast is served from 7 to 9 in the morning. As they slipped out, leaving Miss Doris chatting animatedly with their guests, Jacob leaned close to her ear. I know that look on Miss Doris's face, he whispered. She's plotting something. When isn't she? Elise replied. But her matchmaking days might be over. How would she even find a summer romance from 30 years ago? Never underestimate that woman, Jacob warned with a smile. This inn really does have a way of bringing people together, doesn't it? Elise touched the antique key now hanging around her neck, smiling up at her fiancé. It certainly does. For second chances, new beginnings. And happily ever afters, Jacob finished, pulling her close beneath the stars that now blanketed the summer sky over Palmar Island. Behind them in the warm glow of the Pelican Inn, a woman sat reminiscing about a love she'd once thought would last forever. Little did she know that the past she believed long buried was about to resurface in the most unexpected way, proving once again that some stories aren't finished, they're just waiting for the right moment to begin their next chapter. The end. This has been Restoring Pelican Inn. Written by Susanne Ash. Copyright 2024 by Susanne Ash. Production copyright 2024 by Susanne Ash. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe if you want me to put more of my books on YouTube. Visit my website at www.susanneash.com for more of my books or find me on Amazon.